welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. For more than a decade, Sarah Seltzer has been a feminist journalist and cultural critic. Her lively writing for publications including the New York Times, Time, Jezebel, Glamour, Cosmopolitan, The Nation, and many others has shaped the discourse on subjects ranging from Hollywood casting to abortion rights to Jane Austen and beyond. A native and lifelong New Yorker, Sarah is currently the executive editor at Lilith magazine. The Singer Sisters, her debut novel, is out now. Sarah Seltzer, thank you so much for joining today to talk about your triumphant debut novel, The Singer Sisters. Author Emily Schultz says tearing through the pages of The Singer Sisters was like flipping through a friend's magnificent record collection and wanting to borrow every last one. Sarah Seltzer's sweeping and tenderly crafted novel is a quilted history of American music that reminds us that the past can sing. Author Adele Waldman says The Singer Sisters is a superb novel, inventive, original, and extremely intelligent. I felt bereft when it was over. Author Jessica Gross says The Singer Sisters is a breezy, compelling read with momentous questions at its core. What does it mean to be parented sufficiently, to be loved well? What is worth sacrificing for the sake of artistic ambition? Does the muse work on a time frame, or will it wait? And author Robin MacArthur says, what a pleasure to read this book. A delightful journey. I loved dipping down into the early folk scenes of Cambridge and New York, the feminist rock of the 90s, the pop industry of the 2000s, and seeing how a family can be torn apart and stitched back together via the miracle of song. So I could go on, but I'll turn it over to you now, Sarah. With that, what can you tell us about The Singer Sisters?
So The Singer Sisters is my tribute to the power of songs, and the way songs evoke certain eras in our lives. And I also think that I come from a family of lawyers, and
Thought you were going to say musicians there.
I'm the only no musicians, the only non-lawyer in my family, and so it represents this. And we're loud talkers. We talk about everything. We have a lively family text thread, but back in the 2010s, I went to a couple of group folk concerts, and I was just really captivated by the idea of friends, family, exes, lovers, like being on stage together and communicating their feelings via song, and maybe being able to communicate their feelings via song in a way that they can't in real life. So that's where the seed was planted, this idea that there's a family, they have a kitchen table where they have their arguments and their big discussions, just like the rest of us. But then they also have this other dimension to them where they are each other's muses and each other's rivals and each other's artistic collaborators. And their songs are becoming part of the public record for everyone else too. So that's sort of where it came from. I went to this memorial concert for a folk artist named Kate McGarrigle, who was in a group with her sister, Anna McGarrigle. And her, it was really emotional. Her kids are both folk rock and like pop singers, Rufus and Martha Wainwright. She has nieces and nephews and old friends and collaborators, and they were up there singing her songs about her divorce and about being a mother and about her children and about her sister. And they were all sort of singing her songs, and she was a really good songwriter. And they were weeping, and we were all weeping, and it was just really tender and intimate and really powerful moment. And I thought to myself, gosh, this would make a really good novel. I mean, and I was I was in grad school working on short stories, so I kind of put it in my back pocket. And after I became a mom, it sort of the idea called back to me. I partly because I didn't have the time and the energy to edit my short stories or go back to writing short stories, which I think takes so much concentration. So I thought it would be fun to kind of write this history of a musical family, um, and um, and sketch it out. And then that's how I got the draft of the book. And it captivated me enough to propel me through the first draft pretty quickly. So I kind of knew I was onto something at that point.
Do you remember the first time that you sat down to start writing this novel, to start working on the novel?
So there was two. There was I think that like when my first child, who is now 8, was very little. I don't know if he was a newborn, but he was a baby. I might have even still been out on leave. I wrote like one scene. I just scribbled something down and then didn't touch it again for a year plus. And then it was the summer that he was like a little over a year and a half, and he was just starting to sleep through the night, and things were like, and I was having a really hard time just in general. I had like a pretty easy postpartum period, but then just adjusting to being a working parent was really hard for me. And my husband was like, go take a writing class, do something, like get back into your writing. And I found a generative writing class um in New York City that, the whole purpose was to write a manuscript, not no critiquing, no serious workshopping. It was just trying to get us to all write together. And so I
That sounds
remember I had
great.
like a brown notebook. Yeah. And so for the first, like before the first session, I just sat down and started writing it. And I remember like I can see what the notebook looked like and how it felt to
Yeah.
write it.
You mentioned that you're not a musician and there are not musicians in your family, but your husband is a music journalist, right?
Yes.
Was he a resource for you in researching for the novel for the Singer Sisters, or how did you research?
So the main role that he played was getting me to those concerts. I mean, besides the fact that
Mhm.
he was like my emotional and spiritual support throughout writing the whole thing, and very encouraging. And watching the kids when I went off to write and all this stuff. But it was that I think, everyone, I've said this before, like everyone loves music when you're a teenager and you're your 20s. Um, Going to concerts is a fun thing you do with your friends, and you have your artists that you're passionate about, but it can be very hard to keep up when you get older. With what's with going to shows, and I think people have to pick and choose like what art form they're going to continue to be passionate about as they get older, because you can't just do everything. And so the fact that music is so important to him, and that he continues to go to live music all the time, was really good for me.
Mm.
I think it kept me going a good 10 years after I would have probably given up myself, and just reminding me of the power of music. And, those concerts I was just talking about definitely directly inspired the book. But then there's also just sort of I think the act of going to any concert, whether it's classical or like a Broadway musical or hip hop or whatever, it always gets my creativity going,
Mhm.
being in that space. So, I owe a lot of that to him. And there was some fact checking he did at the end, kind of. Like names of certain clubs, names of guitars. Like we did some of that together, kind of looking it up and figuring it out, making sure it all felt accurate for
And you
sure.
did a lot of watching it behind the music, I think you've said a lot
I watched a
of.
lot of behind the music as a teenager and in my 20s. I mean, that, a ton of VH1. For research for this book, so the book takes place in the 1960s and the 1990s.
Mhm.
It starts in the 90s, at this big folk rock concert, at Brown University, Brown Spring Weekend. And my protagonist, whose name is Emma, is trying to make it really, it's she's trying to break out and become a star. And her parents were these folkies in the 60s and her aunt. So she has this family legacy, but she hasn't sort of made a name for herself quite yet. All that's just all the 90s stuff is just right from my own experience. I'm like maybe 5 or 6 years younger than she would be. So I would have been like in the audience at the show or and so the fashions, the way people talked, all that I was able to kind of just access with a little help from Google to make sure some of the dates and things were right. The 60s stuff, I also have just always been a huge fan. And I, about like 15, 20 years ago, maybe less, I read this memoir by Bob Dylan's girlfriend from his Village years, the woman who's on the cover of the
Mm.
Freewheelin' Bob Dylan with him, Susie Rotolo. It was like Italian communist red diaper baby who got him involved in politics before he left her for Joan Baez. Um, and her memoir was incredible. It was really like written in this very artsy way, like free associating and vignettes. But it really gave me an idea of what it was like in the village at that time.
Mhm.
So I had that kind of, and so I didn't do another round of research until I was done with about 3 drafts. And then once I felt like I had a solid manuscript, I went back and I read a bunch of books about like Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez and Dylan and Joan Baez's sister, Mimi Farina, and her boyfriend, Richard Farina, or her husband, and Carol, there's that triple biography of Carole King, Joni Mitchell, and Carly Simon. I read Carly Simon's memoir, which had great fashion details.
Wow.
I read a biography of Janis Joplin. I kind of just I didn't do I did like whatever kind of came across my desk. I read for a while there. I read a book called Folk City that had very like good details about which clubs were on which street and like who would have played where. And that really helped just sort of like shore up some of the details that I had already put in there. And I was able to add a couple of little things like from the Carly Simon memoir, I added some little touches about what everyone was wearing and how they talked. The funny thing about the celebrity memoirs is some of them are more outrageous than you could like reasonably put in fiction.
I was just thinking that sounds like a really fun reading
It
list.
was such a fun reading list. It was a great, and it was a great thing to do. And I kind of recommend it to other writers, like while you're letting one of your drafts marinate to do your research then. Because you
Yeah.
do sometimes need to take those breaks before you get back into a specific, before you get back into revising a huge novel or memoir. So it's a great moment to research because you're still working on it, but you're not working with the words on the
Yeah.
page.
Yeah, during the break. That's a great, that makes such sense to me. You you wrote a fair amount of lyrics for this book. You say again, you're not a musician, but there are a lot of lyrics that are written in this book.
Yes.
And some of them are being recorded as songs. Is this true?
I had a friend who has done a couple demos for me of a couple of the songs, and I loved them. I'm not sure, it's up to her kind of what she wants to do with them because it's her music, but it's been really fun to hear the music. And I'm hopeful that either she or other musical friends will kind of take up the charge. Yeah, the lyrics were really fun. A lot of the lyrics are kind of unchanged from my very first draft. Like that part was um incredibly just playful and fun for me to write because I do have a little bit of a background in writing poetry and lyrics are just, they're their own kind of writing
Mhm.
because they don't have to, every word doesn't have to be as precise as it does with a poem. It has to just sort of sound good. So that was so, so fun. And people have been like, that has been one of sort of the most universally like positive things that readers have told me about the book is how much they like the lyrics because the lyrics are also really meant to move the plot forward. They're not just there for decoration. So there are kind of clues in them to how the characters are feeling or what they might have been through. Um and some of the other characters figure it out, or some of them like kind of really don't figure it out, like Emma. Um Emma, like there's a lot of the book is about how Emma kind of knows that her mom and her aunt wrote these and sang these classic songs about being a woman and like, about their lives. And she never really was able to figure out kind of what it said about who her mom was and what her mom had been through until kind of
Mm-hmm.
midway or halfway through the novel, the light bulb goes off. And she's like, if I kind of, because her, a lot of the plot of the novel is fueled by the tension, the mother-daughter tension, and
Mm-hmm.
Emma's desire to kind of surpass or equal her mom as a musician and a performer and an artist. And part of what she has to go through is figuring out who her mom really was.
Yeah.
And like what the connection between the public and the private persona. And so a lot of that's found in the lyrics. So it was just, so they're sort of puzzle pieces. And I wrote a couple little lyrics, which I can't say more because there's a spoiler at the very end, like the last revision. I added a couple of lyrics too. It was like a really, really fun part of the whole experience writing the book.
Well, speaking of this mother-daughter relationship, it's a multi-generational story. Um, and the book looks closely at some of the challenges around motherhood and mothering in our culture and what women are often expected to give up or feel that they should give up when they take on this role. And you make this really interesting point, which is that one of the reasons that particularly early motherhood can feel stifling and overwhelming is not just because of the obligation that we feel to do right by our children, but because of this overwhelming love that kind of takes us over. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that you know, so Judy kind of tells herself a story at the beginning of her when she marries Dave, who's another character in the book, and they're both folk singers and they have two kids. And at the very beginning, she's totally awash in hormones and like she feels like she did it. She made her parents proud. She kept the family going. She's a good mom. And she kind of tells herself a story like maybe this is what I was meant to do all along. But I think that her feelings are real. Like she's genuinely happy. And that's a story that's true of a lot of rock stars that we John Lennon had his famous like baking bread and being a house husband phase, right? When he had a new baby where he stopped doing music for a while to raise his kid. And sort of similarly to Judy, I think Lennon often said like he felt like he had a sort of second shot at it because when he was in his dissipated Beatles phase, he like wasn't a great dad to his first son, to Julian. So there's John Lennon, Patti Smith, Bruce Springsteen. These are all really famous artists who all took extended breaks to take care of their kids. Um, and so, you know, that's sort of how Judy's break starts. She decides to have, she has sort of a breakdown. Her sister kicks her out of the band, and then she decides um, to go ahead and start a family. And she loves it at first. And she's really devoted to her kids, but there's sort of cracks in there because ultimately she is an artist. And at some point, um, she's suppressing that side of herself as well. And her kids suffer for it. So it's really complicated. I think like a lot of the literature of early motherhood kind of, yeah, like posits like motherhood is a sort of kind of awful, all-consuming thing that takes you away from your work.
Mhm.
But there's the other way too, where the desire for work and takes you away from your kids. I feel, as a parent of my kids are now 5 and 8, sometimes I feel like I wish I didn't want to write. No,
Yeah.
like and I could just live in the moment and I really have to push myself to like live in the moment with my kids too. So and it goes back and forth all the time. Like sometimes I'm with my kids and I want to be writing and sometimes I'm at a book event or something and I wish I were just home, eating chicken nuggets. So that's what I wanted to get across about parenting and being an artist, that it's not, one thing isn't robbing the other. It's a push pull, and I think that's what psychologists call it, like the push pull of parenthood. Um, and it's there all the time. And, Um, and that the work of raising a family is important too, and
Yeah.
that, a lot that's there that's that there's this unsung contribution that the women in the novel are making, not just the mothers, but all the women sort of to raising the next generation and taking care of the previous
Ah,
generation. And some of the characters sort of nakedly ask themselves the question, like, what's more, what matters more at the end of the day? Like the physical legacy I'm leaving with my family, like the work I've done
mhm.
to try to be a good person and take care of my family, or the art that I've made that like maybe millions of people have enjoyed, but is not personal in that same way. So it's a lot of open questions, I think.
Yeah. And another theme that I particularly loved in the book is this look at all the different kinds of creativity and art and the different ways in which artists express and value their own talents and contributions. So, for example, we have Judy, the mother, who's a wonderful songwriter, but maybe not as into performing on
Yep.
stage, versus Emma, her daughter, who likes to be on stage, but struggles sometimes with writing in the way
Yep.
that her mother
Exactly.
wrote. So, I'm just interested in your decision to include that and your thoughts and feelings on it.
Yeah, I do sometimes think that there's because, well, I don't want to be critical of other writers, but I think because writers are often, when they're writing about another art form, it's
Mhm.
often a stand-in for writing. Right. So like you put a painter in a novel or a musician, and like it's a stand-in for writing, which is actually, mostly like a private personal act, then has this sort of public thing that happens at the end after you finish writing something and you go out and meet an audience. And so with singing and with music, I was actually really interested in a kind of artistic output that I don't really have much experience in, which is this, desire to perform. Because it really is both, right? There's the introspective Judy, who I think would totally, often be happy to just like be in an attic all day writing songs, and tinkering with them. And then on the other side of it is her sister, who loves being on stage, and her sister is a closeted lesbian at the beginning of the book, and comes out by the end. But she likes being on stage because some like the theatricality of it and like the persona she adapts makes her feel more comfortable in her own skin in a way.
Mhm.
And then the two, and then she, and then Dave is kind of both. He's like, he can't live without, he loves to tour, he likes to be on stage, and he also likes being in the studio. And then there are the two children, Leon and Emma. And, Leon is like this pure, he's a producer, he experiments, he like switches from genre to genre. And Emma is like, I think of her sort of as like this, she like just likes to be on stage with her guitar and connecting with the audience, and maybe that's because she is missing some kind of connection from her mom or something like that, or she needs the approval.
Mhm.
Um, but it's all, yeah, so I just wanted there to be a whole range of that, like, because of course in one musical family and one artistic family, not everyone would approach their art in the exact same way, or approach being public in the same way.
Yeah.
And when you go to a lot of concerts, you see that there are musicians out there who have really different attitudes towards being on stage and having an audience. There are some people, Rufus Wainwright is one. We see him on tour whenever he comes through New York City, and I think he seems to really, I mean, who knows, but he seems to really enjoy being on stage. He changes costumes during his shows. And we've seen other indie bands where like the singer is like sitting on the stage and kind of hiding, and trying to let the music speak for itself. Um, so it's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. We met this summer, you and I, at VCFA, where I was doing my graduating MFA residency, and you were the visiting fiction writer there to read and talk about your novel and your work, but you're also an alum.
Yep.
So, could you talk a little bit about your decision to get an MFA and what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, it was really wonderful. So I always wanted to write novels. And I wrote one right sort of in my early 20s. And it was I know I was able to write the whole thing, but I just felt that there was something deeper, like that it was sort of a fun book, but there was something deeper missing from it. And I didn't really know what. And I was, I had a career as a journalist. So I knew that I kind of knew how to write nonfiction, but I kind of got the idea that maybe I needed to study the writing of fiction, specifically the craft of fiction, um, on its own as something separate from the nonfiction. And I really I got the idea to do a low residency program because I literally like I saw an Atlantic article that was like the best low residency MFAs and I was like, what? There are MFA programs in Vermont and like Maine where you can go up for a week and I got really captivated by the idea because I had sort of established a life and a career in New York and
Mhm.
he said my husband was a journalist. I'm a journalist. Our families were here, so there was no way I was moving for an MFA.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to even, even the New York programs seemed very like time consuming. Like they would be hard to do with work. And I just got to love the idea of going up and being in Vermont and like being somewhere beautiful. So I kind of applied on a whim to a bunch of the low residency programs and just really fell for VCFA. And it really did exactly what I hoped, in addition to learning a lot about the craft of fiction. I studying short stories was really, I think, helpful
Mhm.
for the novel eventually because it just teaches you how to put a lot of weight on each scene, and keep kind of forward momentum going and um yeah, and to not waste space really. And I also got a cohort of writer. I mean, I still am on a group text 15 years
Mhm.
later or whatever with my buddies from my class, who were all so different as writers, right? Like
Mhm.
we've got experimental poets and lyric essay writers and people who write a friend who writes like sort of really quirky, creepy, amazing flash fiction. Is his main genre. So we're all over the place in terms of our writing, but that, means we can just sort of support each other. It was just an incredible experience. I mean, I think it was like I sometimes joke it was like the arts camp I never went to, but should have as a teenager, right? Like, or I mean, and I think for me, like as a human being, like I have like I think of myself as having an analytical side and a creative side, and the analytical side is like the journalism and like the study of literature and like thinking about politics, and then the creative side is just like the side that really likes to write. And it was this place where I felt like both of them were in harmony together all the time when I was there.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I could really be myself for that reason. And it's a very unique way that I still kind of find only in the writing classroom do I feel that way. And it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do
How
you
did
still
yeah,
take writing classes?
I teach
Like
them now.
you teach. Where
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
teach?
So sometimes I teach in New York with Sackett Street.
Okay.
And I also work with this program called Monthly Mentorship, which is run by this wonderful writer named Katie Schultz. And it's like a curriculum that she devised and has perfected. And so it's like a 6 month long or 8 month long class where you read for craft and then you apply it to your own writing. And it teaches you how to be your own best editor. So I'm doing that for the first time this year, teaching with that program, and I love it. Um, so that's yeah, so I've just sort of started teaching writing in the last couple years and I love it. I mean, I just like really love being in that space with
Yeah.
students. Yeah.
Have you always been a writer?
Pretty much. Yeah. I have my parents have like framed poems from first grade hanging on the wall. So very much I was a writer, I was a reader, I was like an Anne of Green Gables, Little Women kind of yeah, like voracious reader as a kid. And kind of I always assumed that writing would be part of um my career. Like I wasn't sure
Mhm.
how, but I that was kind of always in the cards for me, I think. Very boring. I was the editor of my high school newspaper. I worked on my college newspaper. Did the lit mags, was all that stuff. So,
I think that's not boring though, because
yeah.
it shows that there's a path, right, that can
Yes.
be followed and you
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah, and
Um,
in my 20s, I often felt like I was straying from the path because I was freelancing, I was doing like reporting, some reporting and like yeah, just sort of a whole mixed mishmash of things, and I was tutoring kids in the city and doing some teaching. Um, I didn't have a job at a magazine or a newspaper. I wasn't working my way up the ranks the way my friends were. I was kind of bopping around a little bit, but I'm really happy now that that's what I did because I think it gave me a lot of material for my writing. And I'm glad that I didn't get kind of stuck on a career path because then I wouldn't have had the chance to write the novel, I think. So.
well, what was the road to publication for you with the novel?
So it was pretty straightforward, except for the fact that in the in the middle of writing it, there was COVID happened. There was like a couple of things. There was like I was about 2 years in to writing it, and starting to feel like send out feelers and think about agents and things. And I got pregnant with my second kid. My husband got very sick, and then kind of once the baby was old enough for me to go back to work, and my husband was better. COVID happened. So there was this long break where it's just like one disaster after not that the baby was a disaster, but one big life change after another. And we moved in the middle of all this too. And so the book was completely put on the back burner. Um and once I sort of saw a window to work on it again, almost 2 years of no writing. I really like jammed on it and I reordered the whole thing. So it's a non-chronological
Hmm.
now, at least the first half is non-chronological, and it had initially been chronological. So I really worked hard on the structure for about a year. And then I found my agent very quickly through a colleague slash mentor, who I sent the pages to a friend of mine from BCFA who was had worked at a literary agency many years ago. And she said, the opening was ready to go. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to send it to one more person just in case Sarah was being really nice to me because she's my friend. So I sent it to Yona. And she was like, "Well, these are pretty ready, and I actually think that my agent might like them because she has a past as a performer and she loves the theater and she likes this kind of music, so it might be up her alley." And the match got made pretty quickly with Susanna, who's my agent, Susanna Einstein, and she and I worked on it for, I think I signed with her in February, and then she got edits to me in like April or something, and then we worked on it for like 6 months. And then it was like 2 or 3 rounds of edits, and then went right out on submission. And this one, the one editor that we both kind of thought was going to be a good fit was a good fit. So it all happened that part was very straightforward. I always tell everyone like the writing was not straightforward because of all these kind of crazy things that happened in the middle, but the agent and sale part was, which was great because I get very stressed. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but it was nice to have a relatively stress-free submission and agent hunt.
Yeah.
I feel really lucky about that.
Yeah. Well, so your process, the writing process on book number one, although you had some things going on there in the middle.
Yeah.
When you were first writing, you said you restructured it so that you're
Mhm.
working on that structure. So when you were first sort of getting the whole draft out and you were writing chronologically, were you still sort of jumping around and getting ideas for scenes in your
Yeah,
head
I
or
didn't write it chronologically. Like the manuscript, initial manuscript was chronological, but in fact the structure that it ended up with, I believe, sort of more reflects how I actually wrote it, which was I was jumping
interesting?
around and I was writing scenes that like occurred to me. I really like in a way that I don't know if I will be able to do again, but was just kind of because it was such a like impulse project when I started it, and it was so doing it for fun, and I felt really liberated when I was first drafting it. Like I just wrote whatever scenes came to mind, and I would I was keeping a list of like I had an idea for a scene, and I would like make a list of like write this scene, and then so it wasn't like and I had this class, so I was turning in pages every 2 weeks for the class, and talking to the other people in the class about my ideas, and so it wasn't like totally crazy, but I've definitely kind of just followed my interest until I had enough to put together into a manuscript, which I then had, starting in the 1960s when the Judy and Sylvia are in Boston with their family, and Dave shows up with his guitar, and the family. So I had it kind of as the history of the family, and
Mhm.
then by revising it, it became the story of the women and particularly the two women, the mother and daughter in the family, and that I think is often how we revise, even with our short stories, right? Where we get the shell down we write down everything that happens in the story, and then we kind of figure out like what's the story within the story that I'm actually trying to tell, and what do I need to zoom in on and focus on, and like perhaps open and close the story with, so that I'm making it clear to my audience um what the
So
inner story.
do you have that shell? Would you consider yourself, plotterer, pantser kind of in that way? Did you have an idea of the sort of whole story ever? What point does that come to you?
Yeah, I had, I think I'm half and half. I'm like a
Yeah.
plotter and a pantser. So I don't do formal outlines. But I do kind of keep running outlines and ideas, like scene lists in the back of whatever notebook I'm using. And I have a general idea of sort of the container for
Mhm.
the whole story, like where I want it to start and end. And I'm open to, but I'm a pantser in the sense that I'm very open to changing
Mhm.
it, and try and kind of just, yeah, follow my inclination when I'm drafting, I would say. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Are you working on a second novel now?
I am working on something. I don't even know if I'd call it a second novel yet. But I am, I have a couple things going. I have like a very messy manuscript. And then I also have essays, that I've been just trying to write, like short essays and things. So, but I mean, they're all, it's very tricky. Like, so now that I'm promoting the book, and most of the book tour is over, but I still do have these events every so often, some of which take me away from home, and that is the time that really normally I would be using to write. So, because I have a job, I work at a magazine. It's 4 days a week, and I teach. So, I'm pretty busy. I
Mhm.
have two children, and so that part, like the question for me of like when I'm going to turn to whatever I'm scribbling and like take it more seriously, which probably will involve like some days away from home,
Mhm.
or like, sacrificing some weekend days at the library or whatever, is a big open one for me
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about you're the executive editor of
Mhm.
Lilith magazine. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So Lilith is a Jewish feminist quarterly. And it's kind of like I joke about, like, we're kind of like a Jewish feminist New Yorker, because we publish fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, book reviews, and then also journalism. And we take, at least, I take the Jewish feminist uh label like very broadly, and um and loosely. We do, it's a really fun, working at a quarterly is very fun, because we are, able to do things that are timely and current. We had, one of our most popular issues, we did a big picture issue called Our Bodies Under Attack, when after Roe was overturned. Um and But we also get to do like kind of quirky things too. Like we did an issue called Jews and Tattoos, where we did a whole spread in the middle of illustrations and stories about, and you're not like, it's a taboo to get tattoos when you're Jewish. It was like, I think we're like the first Jewish publication that's ever done like a cover story on tattoos and Jewish tattoo artists,
Cool.
and people who get like Jewish. It was totally fascinating to me. And we did one on another cover story on like we called it Jew witches, or the cover was called Who's in Your Coven. And people who like do pagan or Wiccan stuff and combine it with their Jewish practice. So like we go all over the
Cool.
place. And I think one of the things that's most fun about it is I love running the book review section. I love pairing up writers with books I think they're gonna like.
Mhm.
And I also just, yeah, love meeting and interacting with writers. And if writers come to us, with, because we're so kind of niche and we're, we've been around for a really, Lilith has been around for a really long time. My boss, Susan, the editor-in-chief, is one of the founders. It was founded in the 70s during the second wave of feminism. So it's like a true survivor. Not many, I think just us and Ms.
Yeah.
are around from that era. But if people come to us, they tend to come to us with like fun ideas, and interesting ideas that might not fit elsewhere. So that part is it's very enjoyable. Yeah.
What do you know now that you would have liked to have known before publishing your first novel?
I think I feel really lucky. So I'm 41. I published the book just a few months ago, and I sold it when I was 39. And that I came to this process after after being out of college for almost 2 decades and doing a lot of work in therapy and just in life with like not relying on external validation.
Mhm.
Because I think that, once people sort of focus a lot on how agonizing the querying and submission process is, but once you're out, your book is out there, even like the minute the galley is on these websites like Edelweiss and NetGalley, you're starting to get feedback, and it's never going to be enough. Like I know people who's published their first book this year and who got everything, like who got a book club pick and a billion reviews on I don't know, on Goodreads, and we're kind of like the hot book and still feel resentful that they didn't get their publisher didn't send them here, and they got this really mean review on this website. There's always kind of there's a lot of negative noise or a lot of lack of noise, no matter what, no matter how successful the book is. And I um I guess I was well prepared for that. I guess I wasn't so that's, I feel like happy that I've kind of been somewhat even keeled about that. Like
Mhm.
I haven't gotten too many really mean reviews, but one lady um wrote like, oh, someone stop her from writing again on Goodreads, but she gave me 2 stars, so I was like, okay, you must have
Well,
liked it a little bit.
yeah.
um but I am like very comfortable telling that story, and like I'm not ashamed of it, because like I'm proud of the book, and I think like the readers who like it are loving it. So you have to be able to laugh at that stuff and not go cry in your room, because if that kind of thing makes you feel really terrible, you're gonna get it all the time. You're gonna feel terrible all the time. And I do know people who find publishing their first book really mentally taxing, because it's hard. This is your baby. It's like your garden that you've tended for all these years. Nobody, I mean, everyone's book takes at least a year, usually way more. And then it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the readers. That part is really
Yeah.
hard. And I think I found the weeks like right before and right after publication day more stressful than I expected. Because that, I mean, I think the getting the negative feedback or whatever was something that I'm used to in my career as a writer and an editor. But the not knowing like what publication day would be like and what the events
Yeah.
would be like was an unknown to me. And it ended up kind of being exactly what I would have expected. Like I had really fun events, and like most people who said they were going to came, and a couple of people came and surprised me.
Mhm.
And the conversations were, like it was not worth getting so worked up about. But at the same time, anything you don't know and you've never experienced it before, you are going to get worked up about, I think,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's human nature. So, so it's just, it's all kind of heady and overwhelming. And, I know, it's hard. I think debuting is tough. And maybe a little bit tougher than I realized. But the other side of it is like, it's just great to be a published author. Like um, it's great to have it in the actual like pub date to be in the rear view mirror.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice to be at the phase where like you can kind of do as much as you want for the book.
Mhm.
You can say yes or no to events kind of up depending on how you feel about it. If you want, if you want to like try to jazz people up about it, you can. But if I have friends who debuted around the same time as I do, and I'm just still doing events, and they're back to write. They just want to keep writing. Like that's what they love. They're back to their desks. So I think it's nice that at the other side of it, you can kind of follow your bliss.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
Everyone says the same thing. That I think so. Two things actually. I think number one, they're kind of opposite pieces of advice. Number one, like what matters really is the work, right? And at the end of the day, like nothing that happens to you. I mean, maybe this isn't true because I haven't been like picked by Oprah and I probably never will. But nothing that like sort of in the ordinary mortal realm of occurrences happens to you after you publish the book will feel as good as it does like when you have a really good writing day. And
Mhm.
do something that you feel proud of, or give it to your spouse or your friend and they like cry because it's so beautiful. Like those kinds of moments you can't, um, there's nothing after publication that lives up to it. On the other hand, I do think like publication, I always say this is what I run a fellowship at Lilith for writers over 40 who are writing their first, like often writing their first creative nonfiction or personal essays or short stories, and they've never really been published before, and they have a lot of trepidation about it.
Mhm.
And I say, like, all the stuff that we've just talked about, the feedback and the, feeling exposed, I think is worth it because, we want to connect with an audience. We're writers. That's what we do. And that, when you get the email from the reader who says, like, this really resonated with my life and, I I did an event out in Ohio with a singer-songwriter who said she thought that I did a really great job, right, capturing what it's like to be on stage. And I've never been on stage with a guitar, and like it was such a wonderful. And she like gave me a hug, like it was just and she was so cool, and so funny, and like those little moments, like that's why we do it, So it is to connect with people and to make them feel things, and for everyone who says never write again, there's someone who says like I cried at the ending. So I think it's worth it. And to keep that in mind. Yeah.
We have a traditional last question,
Okay.
and it's perfect for your play. Very fitting. When The Singer Sisters is made into a movie
Oh
or series,
no.
what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh, well, I mean, someone should obviously put one of the songs um in my book to music. But if they didn't do that, there are two I think of that I think, would be probably hard to get the rights to, at least one of them. But there's a song, All I Want by Joni Mitchell that opens her album Blue, where she talks about being on the road and traveling. And there's like a traveling song in my book that called Route 95 that keeps which is kind of a joke because Route 95 is always like totally clogged with trucks and traffic. But that keeps coming up throughout the book. So I think that there's other traveling songs that I was referring to, but that one is, it has such a great opening. The first like guitar chords in that song are so iconic. So it'd be like a great opening to a TV show. And then there's Possession by Sarah McLachlan, which is this
Mhm.
thudding 90s song that kind of put her on the map as a singer, and heralded the whole Lilith Fair era.
Yeah.
So that would be another, and that would just like Paula Cole, who was another Lilith Fair era artist, like her song I Don't Want to Wait, I think that's what it's called, was the theme song for Dawson's Creek. Like
Oh,
those
yes, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
those 90s like pop rock songs were like great theme songs for a TV show.
Yeah.
So I think Possession would be a great one. And she also like I mean, it's the song that she made from a note that a stalker sent her. And
I
it
didn't
has like
know that.
these lyrics like you speak to me in riddles and you speak to me in rhymes, which, was a lot of like one of the themes of the book, right? Where the
Yeah.
characters are kind of speaking to each other in their rhymes and their lyrics. So yeah.
I'm ready. I'm ready
Yeah,
for
let's do it.
I'm ready for the series of the movie. Sarah Seltzer, thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out today. It has been such a treat getting to hang out and talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.